Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
The first name on the list was Edward Morse, absolutely definitive within the global zeitgeist, if you will, the Washington Consensus on Petroleum, all sorts of efforts here, including his work with the Council on Foreign Relations. And we're honored that Dr. Morse would join us in our studio today. Welcome to Bloomberg, Dr. Morse. When I look at this, I think the arch question is a cup of coffee this morning with the President of the United States. How would you brief him on the timeline to get Venezuela to a new Caracas, a new Venezuela?
The timeline is very, very long. The timeline includes not just what must be done on the oil patch, but also includes how do you get this government to cooperate with the United States. And yes, they're starting out on a good foot, but this can't be done without a change in the entire view of the government of how they do what they do. They're there to make money. They're there to control things. And they can't do that and have the oil patch resume what it was like 25 years ago. This
is a transactional president. You have lived with your iconic work at Citigroup, a transactional big American banks enjoying losing big money in Latin America and other places. What do you perceive as a relationship of President Trump with Mr. Diamond, with Mr. Moynihan, and with other financiers of America?
Well, he's got a good relationship with the financial sector for all kinds of good reasons that we could get into. That's a separate subject. But here, the capital has to come from oil companies. And oil companies look at risk. They look at the risk in the marketplace. What is the supply-demand balance? They look at the risks of an investment. And in the case of Venezuela, they need a lot of capital going into infrastructure. And that infrastructure has to be in place before the oil comes out of the ground. So we're talking here about billions of dollars to restore the infrastructure that will get things going to allow oil on a sustainable basis to rise by a mere 400,000 or 500,000 barrels a day. That's $20 billion. $20 billion is not nothing when oil companies have opportunities in Guyana, opportunities in Argentina, opportunities in Brazil, and opportunities in Africa. So the question is, what will attract companies to spend the capital that Trump needs for the transaction to work?
Paul, Chevron debt, 11.7% is where they are right now, just as an example.
What do you think the U.S. government, or what do you think those energy companies would need from the U.S. government in terms of assurances or whatever to commit that capital, do you think?
Well, they need the reassurance from the Venezuelan side as well as from the U.S. government, because the U.S. government said it is not taking over Venezuela.
Yep, good point.
So it needs to have the confidence, which will be step by step, and I suspect that the first step will be with Chevron, to see whether they can make good in short-term input of capital with short-term return. So I think it's going to be a slow process, but it will be trust building on trust, and we'll see how smooth that transition goes.
Talk to us, just describe the energy. When we talk about Venezuela, what do they have? What do they need? How big are they? How important is this? Because I understand there's a lot underground.
It's quite important. So the world has known for a long time that Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world. The problem is it's not the kind of oil that the rest of the world needs or wants. And the problem is it's in Venezuela. And it's complicated oil to get out of the ground. But they've done it before, and they've managed to go from under 2 million barrels a day to 3.5 million barrels a day in a relatively short period of time, a couple of decades ago. So if the will is there and the government is there to provide the guarantees, but to do that, you need the government institutions to be reborn. Those government institutions have themselves deteriorated dramatically. They don't have the human resources. They don't have the personnel to be able to guide it. So part of the process will be a return of that human resource base.
Edward Morse with us for a lengthy conversation this morning with Hartree and, of course, Definitive at Citigroup, among other services to the United States over his long decades on petroleum, on hydrocarbons. I believe I've shared the stage with you and Shannon O'Neill at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. O'Neill was on with us recently, exceptionally gloomy about Venezuela's ability to reorganize given an event like what we've seen. I assume you've been to Caracas more than 40 times. You remember a Caracas from another time and place. Do you have any optimism that they can move from a Cuba-like society to something that can get capitalism done?
Well, you have to be a little bit optimistic given the change that has already taken place. So getting Maduro out of that position is a major step. And now the government is in a crisis of survival. That survival will require them to cooperate with the U.S. So the options that they have are quite limited. Who is going to replace the U.S. At this moment in time, given the U.S. military position, the naval position surrounding Venezuela, the control that the U.S. has over Venezuelan exports? It's not easy to imagine a replacement for that. So the good news really is that they are cooperating to start, and we'll see how that goes, but it will be a long road with difficulty.
Is it your understanding, just based upon the limited reporting that we have in the last 48 hours, that the government of Venezuela was in contact with the Trump administration to facilitate Mr. Maduro being taken?
Look, it could not have been done without there being some contact within the government.
Okay.
We know from reporting that that the intelligence operations preceded this. They were on the ground. They had to have help to be on the ground. And undoubtedly, they were not taken by surprise because of the smooth way events went on over the weekend.
How do you think China is viewing what's going on these days?
China's in a difficult position. They are a massive creditor to Venezuela. Venezuela has been central to the Belt and Road Initiative in enlarging China's influence in Latin America. Excuse me, and it's been frankly a failure. They have between 50 and 100 billion of debt. Their operations right now are to export oil to pay for that debt. The U.S. controls their exports out of Venezuela. So they came down and condemned the U.S. government. They had to do that. But they have to take a quiet approach because there's so much at stake between them and the U.S. on a global basis, so much at stake on a bilateral basis, right, including their tariffs that they want to see some resolution on. I think we'll see quiet diplomacy with China and the U.S. rather than stamping on the foot or saying anything about military force.
In my reading, I've heard that. But what does Edward Morse, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Dr. Morse, do we need to show the flag this morning in Kaohsiung Port in Taiwan? Does the U.S. Navy need to get over there and, like Perry centuries ago, show the flag?
Tom, I think the U.S. showed the flag before Maduro was taken out. They showed the flag with a massive military sail to Taiwan.
Right.
And the military has been there. The Navy has been there. China is not in a position to fool around with the U.S., even with much of the U.S. naval fleet now around Venezuela. So I think it's going to be stepping, very lightly on what could happen.
Edward Morse with us, folks, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. We've really held back the commercial interruptions to give you this conversation for America around the world. You have such a relationship with Faisal and On in Saudi Arabia. How does the Middle East in general, and particularly Riyadh and Jeddah, how do they respond to these actions?
They're responding quite quietly. Riyadh is looking at the global setting. They know that Venezuela could be a threat to the production agreement within OPEC Plus, but not in the short run. In the short run, they're looking at the year ahead. The year ahead is quite uncertain and quite messy, and it was that way before the taking of Maduro. So we have Russia-Ukraine. We have uncertainty on the distortion and disruption side around the world, and the Saudis have also a military tie to the U.S. that they don't want to lose. Right. So they have to, and they looked at their budget. The budget requires a lot of borrowing. That borrowing may include in their own minds how low can prices go for us to continue.
Folks, I failed, Paul. I failed. Ed Morse nailed the decline in oil. Do you have a lower oil target from here for Hartree?
So we don't know how low the price will go. It's lifted a little bit by the geopolitical risk. I'd say the supply-demand balance, which is higher supply than there is demand now and going forward, is for oil testing Brent at 40.
Okay.
And I think testing Brent at 40 is something the Saudis can swallow. How much lower than that they can swallow it is not known.
I want to get this in because Paul's got 8 questions. So you're going to go visit Trump. President Trump is going to be an Edward Morse coffee with the president. You're going to talk about a transactional American president. And I know you're going to get a phone call from Ottawa where Mark Carney is going to go, Edmonton's playing Ottawa. Ed Morse, come join me at an Ottawa Senators hockey game. I mean, this is the way it's going to work. What do you say to Mark Carney of Canada?
Well, I'll start with Trump because I haven't answered your question on what I say to Trump. And what I say to Trump is your policy on energy dominance is a wonderful strategy. But, Mr. President, I think you're ignoring some things about energy dominance. And there are 2 things about it. One is that you can't get to where you want without having a significant growth, because this is a world transitioning to electricity intensity. And you can't do the electricity intensity you need for AI and cloud computing and energy dominance without renewables. You can't do it even without hydrogen. So you've got to enlarge what you think about energy dominance. And then, Mr. President, you've got to think about the U.S. The U.S. is not one country when it comes to energy. It's 6. We have 2 exporting segments in the U.S. They are the Gulf Coast of the U.S., and I'm not talking about the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico, but the Gulf Coast. And we have Alaska, both exporters of fossil fuels. And then we have 2 massive importers of fossil fuel with no tie. And, Mr. President, here is the lesson. The reason that we have 2 importers on the West Coast and the East Coast that are massive in scale, global in scale, is because another period of dominance around World War I, we thought we were the best shipbuilding country in the world, and we wanted to retain that dominance. So the Jones Act was enacted. And the Jones Act has meant that when it comes to energy, we are importers because we can't afford American ships to take oil from the Gulf Coast to the West Coast or the East Coast. We need foreign vessels, and they carry foreign ships.
So this is the moment to do away with the Jones Act.
This is the moment to do away with the Jones Act.
Yeah.
And also to tell the president energy dominance, a good idea needs a little bit of massaging at the edges.
I mean, the photograph of Theodore Roosevelt with a map of Venezuela behind him from, I believe, Paul, 1909, was just stunning. I mean, this history going back here. Paul Sweeney with Edward Morse.
So when you go down to Houston, you talk to these big energy companies today. Are they happy with what's going on in the last 24, 48 hours? Or are they apprehensive? Do they see a big opportunity here?
They see a better opportunity than they've seen in years, but they are apprehensive. The risk of putting capital, their shareholders' capital at risk looms extremely large in their minds. So there's not going to be a rush to put money into Venezuela until we see what the structure of the investment might look like.
I'm surprised I don't see a move in WTI and Brent crude today. Now, I couldn't have told you, is it going to be up 5% or down 5%, but we kind of got nothing going on here today.
Well, in my prepared remarks, I thought that was the first question. I didn't know, that we were going to have prices go down a little bit,
it's
then up a little
Bloomberg
bit.
surveillance. we make it up as we go.
We're winging it.
No, I'm not surprised.
Okay.
There is no change in the energy market, period.
There you go. All right. So, but I think at some point, it just feels like almost OPEC and OPEC Plus become less and less relevant every day.
OPEC and OPEC Plus have become less relevant every day since the beginning of this decade. And when we look at the positions that have put this in place, it's not just the rise of Guyana and Brazil and Argentina again, but it really is the U.S. The U.S., I have this battle with my colleagues at work almost every day. The U.S. is not just a crude oil producer. It is a massive liquids producer. We are a producer of 24 million barrels a day. And our growth has been in natural gas liquids. Natural gas liquids compete with oil out of a refinery. They compete with gasoline. They compete with distillate. They compete with fuel oil. They're there for transportation. They're there for home heating and power generation and industrial use. So we are the disruptor of the global market, and we're the ones who put OPEC Plus in a position of defense.
We're going to have to wrap it up here. We've Mark Champion coming up, folks, from Europe with all of his decades of experience. Dr. Morse, some of the highlights of my career here have been with you and with Daniel Yergin If I was to get Jurgen and Morse together and look at the prize, just the romance that I, as a kid in college, read cover to cover, we got to find the romance for Venezuela to save a society, to save a region, maybe to support the Donroe Doctrine. I don't know. How do we get the romance back that you knew working there, that I knew as a student?
I don't know how we do that. I know that I'm not going to bring the romance back, and Dan Jurgen certainly has the ability to do it. By the way, I was an early reader of the prize. He and I knew each other in graduate school. We were in different graduate schools. And when he wrote the prize, the original version that I read was actually twice as long as the version in print. So he had to cut out a lot of wonderful text in order to put out that brilliant book.
The book was, Paul, it was, you had to walk around, even if you didn't read it, you walked around with it
yeah.
to be cool. Jurgen talked about this unique American relationship with various and sundry banana republics, Reagan and Grenada, and the rest. Can we develop a new process with Central and Latin America, or will this be the same old through the rest of the Trump term?
No, I think there is a process going on. If we look at elections that have taken place in Latin America, there's a rebellion in those countries against corruption. There's a move from the corrupt left to the right. We've had a corrupt right in the past, but it's been a very constructive set of moves from free elections. So I think Latin America is in a very good position now, better position than it's been in a long time. And part of it is the lessons learned from China overspending and having a view that all credit has to be repaid.
Wow.
Paul, we got to get to Mark Champion, but Dr. Morse, I got to bring this up. Paul said you got to ask the question, Tom. What's it mean for landman?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Ed Morse, thank you so much. With Hartree, and of course, Dr. Morse with Citigroup for many years. Edward Morse there.